And one more person coming in. Okay, good. Uh, 1 second here. Somebody just tried calling me. Just 1 second.
Would be the baby. He could be a grandpa
Ah,
again and again.
huh.
Did you try calling me? Okay, bye.
No, he's not jumping up and down.
No, no, it was a butt dial for my wife. But okay, yes, as you were saying, Bess, Wednesday is the day for um, the planned induction. So, yes. Anyway, so that's being recorded, and it's good to see everybody for Talmud class. I am sorry that it has taken this long to meet again, and I'm sorry also that our schedule is wacky. Next Sunday, assuming my daughter is induced on Wednesday, we'll be up in New York for a week or so. So there will not be class next Sunday. Well, I had said that anyway because of an unveiling that I was going to go to, but I'm not going to the unveiling. I'm going to be in New York. So um, there's a question about Sunday the 25th, whether we'll be back from New York by then, but I'll let everybody know about that. So again, my apologies about the uncertainty of our and infrequency of our meeting. Let me share my screen and then I'll do the bracha. Okay, so we had left off at a Mishnah on page 153 of the Koran PDF, or let me just go to the bottom to see what page this is. Just a second. It's 27b, 27b of Bava Batra. So, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So again, we're in a chapter dealing with infringing on someone else's property and what one has to realistically do and practically do in order to protect one's something on one's property from infringing on somebody else's property. Okay, so a new Mishnah here. With regard to a tree that leans into the field of another, the neighbor may cut the branches to the height of an ox goad raised over the plow. So let's see a picture. There's a plowman with an ox goad. So the so that's not that's pretty low to the ground. So the height of an ox looks like only waist, maybe chest high. Okay. The height of an ox goad. This was a staff used to prod and direct animals. It's likely that this implement was of a fixed length, slightly less than 1 meter, as the farmer who walked behind the plow had to be able to reach the oxen to prod them. Okay, so the neighbor may cut the branches to the height of an ox goad raised over the plow in places where the land is to be plowed, so that the branches do not impede the use of the plow. Okay, so your neighbor's tree is over your field and you need to plow your field. You just are allowed to trim the tree just to the height that is enough for an ox to walk under, which means that a person has to kind of bend down in order to make it under the branches. And in the case of a carob tree and the case of a sycamore tree, whose abundance of branches cast shade that is harmful to plants, all the branches overhanging one's property may be removed along the plumb line, that is, along a line perpendicular to the boundary separating the fields. Right? So if it's a tree that has a lot of shade that could ruin crops, right? Crops need sunshine, not shade. Then you have the right to have like an invisible line coming up from the boundary of the property and cutting the branches to the line of the property. And if the neighbor's field is an irrigated field, all branches of the tree are removed along the plumb line. Abba Shaul says all barren trees are cut along the plumb line. Okay, so you got to cut the branches, and it depends what kind of tree it is. You might even be allowed to cut the branches way up high in order to prevent shade. Okay, so Gemara. A dilemma was raised before them. That is, the rabbis of the Gemara. Is Abba Shaul referring to the first clause of the Mishnah? That is, when he says all barren trees are cut along the plumb line, which states that a tree extending into a neighbor's field is cut only to the height of an ox goad, and Abba Shaul maintains that barren trees have the same halacha as carob and sycamore trees, and that they are cut along the plumb line? Or is he referring to the latter clause, which discusses an irrigated field, and he permits cutting only barren trees along the plumb line, but not fruit trees? Right? So what is Abba Shaul arguing about? Is it about all trees or just about barren trees being cut? So, like, in other words, so any kind of tree that you might have on your property, I don't know, like that's not a fruit tree, but that in this context is called a barren, like an oak tree or something like that, or a pine tree. The Gemara answers, come and hear a resolution to this dilemma, as it's taught in a Baraita. With regard to an irrigated field, Abba Shaul says all types of trees are cut along the plumb line because the shade is harmful to an irrigated field. This shows that he does not dispute the halacha of the latter clause. Learn from it that he is referring to the first clause of the Mishnah. The Gemara affirms, learn from it that it is so. And just about an irrigated field, the commentaries explain that the trees prevent dew from forming on the field. Since this type of field is not watered naturally and needs to be irrigated, the damage is more extensive. So in other words, an irrigated field needs all the water it can get. And tree branches over the field would prevent dew from collecting on the ground. Rav Ashi said that the wording of the Mishnah is also precise, as it teaches all barren trees. Granted, if you say that Abba Shaul is referring to the first clause of the Mishnah, this is the reason that Abba Shaul teaches all barren trees. But if you say that he is referring to the latter clause, he should have said simply barren trees, as the first Tana permits one to cut down any type of tree. Rather, isn't it correct to conclude from it that he's referring to the first clause? The Gemara affirms, learn from it that it is so. Okay. So, next Mishnah, with regard to a tree
Jonah,
that... Yes, Bess.
I feel I'm missing something. I would think that irrigated fields, it would be less important whether the dew is there because they're irrigated.
Right, but we're
What am
talking about Israel, and the irrigation is not sprinklers. It's like ditches that are dug in the ground from a stream or a small river. So we're not talking about, and it's all dependent on the flow of the stream and the river. So we know from being in Israel recently that the winter time, um, these dry riverbeds are flow when the rain falls, and it depends on how much rain falls. So the irrigation takes advantage of the rainfall. It's not like it's adding extra water that rain doesn't provide. It only channels the rainwater to the field. So, because of that, it's still these fields, even though they might get water from rainwater collected in this way, it's still not much, and it still needs the dew.
Then why did the Gemara specify irrigated fields? Why couldn't it have just said fields?
Because someone might think that an irrigated field might be a little bit different from a plain field. And that maybe someone would think that an irrigated field, it doesn't matter if the branches hang over or not. And they're saying it matters for an irrigated field too.
Obviously. Thank you. My bad.
Okay, next Mishnah, with regard to a tree that extends into the public domain. So we're not talking about fields, we're talking about one's property that abuts the public domain. So with regard to a tree that extends into the public domain, one cuts its branches so that a camel can pass beneath the tree with its rider sitting on it. Now that's pretty high, as opposed to the ox goad in the previous Mishnah, which is pretty low. This one, the public domain, you have to account for the highest means of public transport, and in the time of the Talmud, that would be a camel. And I guess in our day, that would mean a semi-trailer truck, right? Like interstate highways, the overpasses have to be built high enough to allow a truck to pass underneath it, right? And you often see signs in which overpasses might not be high enough for certain trucks to pass underneath. So the camel is the equivalent of a truck in terms of the height in ancient times. So with a rider sitting on top of a camel, that's how high the tree branches need to be cut. Rabbi Yehuda says, one cuts enough branches that a camel loaded with flax or bundles of branches can pass beneath it. So that it's a slightly different height, and I wonder if there's a picture. No, it doesn't look like there's a picture here, but somebody is at the door, and I'm the only one here, so hold on a second, please.
Hey, Bess. Hey, Bess. Hey, Bess. You there?
Is that David?
Yeah, it's David. Hey, Bess.
Yes.
When and where would you like to get together, and can I get your cell phone number?
Oh, I was teasing. I was joking there.
All right. Thanks. Just checking.
No problem. Just said, well, be convenient for a while. Bye-bye.
Okay, so
There's no school today?
yeah, because our teachers are University of Maryland college students, and when they're on break, it's really hard to have school without teachers. So Mitzvah Day is happening today as an alternative to being in school. Okay. So that camel can pass. But Yehuda says one cuts enough branches that a camel loaded with flax or bundles of branches can pass beneath it. So I don't know what the difference of height would be of a camel loaded with commercial items as opposed to a camel with a person on top. I would imagine that those bundles would take the place of the person being on top, and maybe it's even higher than a person sitting on the camel. So, but I don't know. Rabbi Shimon says one cuts all branches of the tree that extend into the public domain along the plumb line so that they do not hang over the public area at all due to ritual impurity. So I can't answer the question that's popping up into people's mind. How would that affect ritual impurity? I really don't know. But I would imagine that we have three kinds of height here. The anonymous statement of the Mishnah, cut the branches just to the height of a person sitting on a camel. Yehuda says cut it to the height of how high you would bundle a camel with bundles of flax. So that could be higher than a person sitting on a camel. And Shimon says, cut it all the way along the plumb line, along the boundary line, so that we don't have to deal with any kind of ritual impurity that could happen from something from the tree, either from the tree going into public domain or from the public domain going onto the tree. But I'm not aware of this offhand, so maybe the Gemara will talk about that. The Gemara asks, who is the Tana who taught that with regard to damage, one follows the current assessment and future damage is not taken into account? The Mishnah states that the tree's branches are cut to the height of a camel and its rider or load, but no more, despite the fact that they will certainly grow again. Reish Lakish says the halacha is taught as a dispute, and it is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. As we learned in a Mishnah, up ahead on page 60, one may not make an empty space beneath the public domain by digging pits, ditches, or caves. Rabbi Eliezer permits one to dig a pit if it's subsequently covered with material strong enough that a wagon loaded with stones can travel on it without it collapsing. If the cover can withstand such weight when the pit is dug, it is permitted despite the fact that the cover might eventually rot.
Jonah,
Yes.
why would somebody want to dig a pit
For storage.
in the public domain we're talking about?
That's what it looks like, yes. Or maybe from his private domain, from his private property, like let's say that private property abuts the public domain and you want to dig a pit that's from your property that goes underground into the public domain. They're saying you can do that if you ensure that the road on top won't collapse. Rabbi Yochanan said, you may even say that the Mishnah here represents the opinion of the rabbis who prohibit one from digging beneath the public domain under any circumstances. The difference is that there the cover will occasionally deteriorate, and as this matter is not on his mind, it will cause damage. But here, as each branch grows, he cuts it off. Since the potential cause of damage is visible, there's no concern that it might be neglected. Right? So if you want to bring up a case of digging under the public domain, it's not necessarily an equivalent scenario, because trees you see when the branches start to invade the public domain. So then you take care of it. You don't know necessarily about the deterioration of the cover to the pit, because it's just like when bridges collapse or road surfaces, like sinkholes happen. You don't know necessarily how strong the infrastructure is. Okay, the Mishnah teaches that if the branches of a tree extend into the public domain, one may cut them to allow a camel and its rider to pass underneath. Rabbi Yehuda says one cuts enough branches that a camel loaded with flax or bundles of branches can pass beneath it. A dilemma was raised before the sages. Is Rabbi Yehuda's measure greater, or is perhaps the rabbi's measure greater? Meaning, which reaches a greater height, a camel and a rider, or a camel loaded with flax? So that was the question I said, but I thought, just from the writing of the Mishnah, that we're going from lower to higher. The Gemara answers, it's obvious that the rabbi's measure is greater, as if it enters your mind that Rabbi Yehuda's measure is greater, how would the rabbis act in the circumstance of Rabbi Yehuda's measure? It's clear that a camel will have to pass beneath the tree with a burden, and it would not be able to do so. The Gemara expresses surprise at this claim. Rather, what then would you say? That the rabbi's measure is greater? If so, how would Rabbi Yehuda act in the circumstance of the rabbi's measure? It's also clear that a camel will have to pass there with its rider. The Gemara answers it's possible for the rider to bend over and to pass underneath the branches. Okay, so it's possible that Yehuda's is lower than the first one. So the rider, the rider could be the higher amount that you have to cut, and Yehuda's opinion with the camel loaded with flax is the lower one, because a rider can bend down. Just like in the previous Mishnah, when you're only cutting the branches over a field to the height of an ox goad, the person pulling the plow would have to bend down for that height too. The Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Shimon says, one cuts all the branches of the tree that extend into the public domain along the plumb line due to ritual impurity. The Gemara explains, a Tana taught in a Baraita that this is due to ritual impurity imparted in a tent. Branches over a corpse might create a tent, thereby transferring impurity to whatever is beneath the branches, rendering impure those passing under the tree in the public domain. Okay, so let me just stop here and explain this a little bit. There are different levels of impurity, and those things that are impure that would then impart impurity to someone who touches it. So there's touching, and that's impurity, but for a corpse, it's more than touching. You just have to be in the same airspace as the corpse in order to have the impurity of the corpse infect you. I'm using the word infection for making you impure. So that's why Kohanim today stay away from funerals and stay away from any building that might have a dead body in it, because just by being in the airspace of the building, even though you're not touching it, and you might not even be in the same room, just by being in the same building, that the corpse imparts its impurity. So a tent, if you're in a tent with a corpse, then even though you're not touching the corpse or anything that serves the purpose of the tent, like trees overhanging the public domain, if a corpse passes under the tree, then it creates an airspace, and if you happen to be under the tree the same time the corpse is there, then you become impure. So if there's no branches there, it's open air, and then it's okay to be in the same space, as opposed to being at a cemetery. So they're not talking about a cemetery, they're just talking about, let's say, the equivalent of a hearse, a wagon carrying a corpse, or somebody who just dropped dead in the middle of the road. If there's nothing overhanging, then it's open air, and one walking by would not become impure. Okay? The Gemara expresses surprise at this statement. It's obvious that this is the reason. We already learned that it's due to ritual impurity. How else could ritual impurity be transferred through branches other than by means of a tent? The Gemara answers, if this is learned from the Mishnah alone, I would say that the concern is that perhaps a crow might bring a source of impurity and perch on the tree's branches and throw it there. Okay, so you have a bird, not just a crow, any bird that might bring, like, I don't know, a piece of meat from an impure animal or any other thing that could be impure. The bird has it and then drops it. Then somebody could touch it and become impure. And if that were the only concern, a mere scarecrow would be sufficient to frighten the crows away and prevent that type of impurity. Therefore, the Tana the Braita teaches us that the concern is due to impurity imparted in a tent. Wait a second, where did it go? Where's the next page? Huh. Why is the next page not coming up? There it is. That's bizarre. Oh, so that was the end of the chapter. Okay. Okay. So now we're about to start chapter 3. Okay. This chapter examines cases in which one performs an activity on his own property and thereby causes damage to his neighbor. With regard to damage inflicted upon a neighbor, the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei that the responsibility to distance oneself is not on the one whose activities might cause damage to his neighbor. Consequently, one who performs an activity on his own property that might cause damage to another at a later stage is not required to take steps to avoid this scenario. This principle applies only if the damage he inflicts is indirect. If the damage occurs immediately or it begins to take effect immediately and its effects gradually increase, it's considered as though he has shot his neighbor with his arrows and the neighbor can object to his activity. This applies to damage that is caused by one's actions to the neighbor's property, for example, his walls, pit, and various plantings on his property, as well as damage that is caused by noise or foul odors. Similarly, if one plants trees and the like whose roots or branches extend into his neighbor's property and potentially cause damage, that neighbor is entitled to chop them down as necessary. The sages establish certain limits within which the damaged party may compel a neighbor to distance the source of the damage from his private or jointly owned property. If one did distance these activities from a neighbor, he's nevertheless still liable for any damage he may cause. Neighbors who live in the same courtyard can prevent one another from performing an activity that will lead to an increase in visitors to the courtyard, whether their objection is due to the noise or simply because they don't want crowds passing through their property. This right to protest applies only to visitors who will enter the outdoor area of the courtyard. If one wishes to work within the confines of his own home, the neighbors can't prevent him from doing so, even if his activity is noisy. As neighbors and residents of the same courtyard can prevent someone from causing them damage, this applies all the more so to residents of a town that are suffering from the acts of a private individual. The rights of the public in this regard include the removal of stumbling blocks, items that interfere with traffic, and articles that spread ritual impurity, and imposing restrictions on activities that discharge foul odors into the city. Likewise, the residents can prevent an individual from spoiling the city landscape. The community can cut down interfering trees and the like, even if the owner originally planted them in a permitted manner. Furthermore, in a case of uncertainty, the public can remove such obstructions without having to pay compensation. Incidental to these discussions, the Gemara discusses several halachot concerning teachers of children and includes a short Aggadic passage about the different effects of winds that come from various directions. Okay, so now we're going to start chapter 3. So this is the intro to chapter 3. According to halacha, one must perform a formal act of acquisition in order to become the owner of property, whether movable property or real estate. Mere possession of movable property, the farming of land, or living in a house is not in and of itself an act of acquisition. Therefore, if one was, for example, living in a house, and another claimed that the house in fact belongs to him, and is able to prove he had been the owner in the past, the one living in the house would be required to substantiate his ownership by producing documentation or witnesses who testify that he had acquired it. The sages understood that it's unrealistic to expect those who purchase property to retain their documentation indefinitely. That might be true in rabbinic times, but I can't imagine anybody not having access to the title on their house. Right? Today, people keep that readily available. They therefore ruled that if the one in possession is able to prove that for a significant duration he had been in possession of and profited from a property as an owner would, and the prior owner had not lodged a protest concerning his usage, this is sufficient to establish a presumption of ownership, and no further proof is needed. This presumption of ownership is referred to as chazaka. The chapter addresses many details of this principle. What is the requisite time for establishing the presumption of ownership? Is it the same with regard to all types of property? What types of use are considered to be indicative of ownership? How is testimony with regard to presumptive ownership presented? Additionally, the chapter explores the aspects of this issue that pertain to what is expected of one who claims to own property that another has taken possession of. How does he lodge a protest? Must the protest be lodged in the presence of the one in possession of his property? Must it be lodged in front of a court or in front of witnesses? A similar issue discussed is the methods by which one can obtain an acquired privilege, also referred to as chazaka, to make use of the property of another for a specific purpose. The term chazaka is employed in an additional manner. It is a mode of acquisition in addition to giving money or writing a bill of sale with regard to land. Here, it refers to a specific act of taking possession by which ownership of the property is transferred. This chapter examines how one takes possession using this act of acquisition with regard to different types of landed property. These issues were often the subject of real-world dilemmas, as there were often conflicts between litigants pertaining to ownership of property. For this reason, many incidents that occurred in the courts of the Talmudic sages are quoted throughout the chapter. Okay. All right. So now, 28a, the first Mishnah of this chapter. With regard to presumptive ownership of houses and of pits and of ditches and of caves, which are used to collect water, and of dovecotes and of bathhouses and of olive presses and of irrigated fields, which must be watered by people, and of slaves, and all similar property that constantly, that is, throughout the year, generates profits, their presumptive ownership is established by working and profiting from them for a duration of 3 years from day to day. All right, so there's a note here. Where's the note? The presumptive ownership of houses. Okay, the Ritva, which is an abbreviation for a rabbi from the Middle Ages, writes that presumptive ownership, chazaka in Hebrew, discussed here, differs from the same term when employed with regard to acquisition. Here, the fact that he has been living on the land for a certain amount of time is viewed as proof that it is indeed his, but it's not in and of itself a mode of acquiring the land. The same term, when employed with regard to acquisition, is used to describe one who actually acquires land by treating it as only an owner would, even for a minimal amount of time. The simplest way to establish that one has title to immovable property is by presenting a bill of sale signed by witnesses, or to have witnesses testify that he has purchased it. In the absence of either of these, one can establish a presumption of ownership by acting with regard to the property as an owner would for the length of time specified in the Mishnah, in accordance with the various opinions stated there. The first third of this chapter focuses on instances where there is a dispute as to who owns property, the one currently in possession of it or another individual who claims to be the owner. Okay, so just interesting about ownership here, and it's like squatting in a house or in an apartment. How to prove, and maybe even how to evict. If the one in possession of the property can prove that he worked and profited from it for the previous 3 full years, there is a presumption that it belongs to him and would remain in his possession if another were to claim that the property belonged to him or to his ancestors. It seems then, let's say somebody became aware that they owned land, or like it was an inheritance or something like that. And in the meantime, for the past 3 years in a row, every day in a row, that field had been worked by somebody else. So let's say I owned the land and I had nothing to do with that land for more than 3 years. Do I have the right to go to court where that land is when I found out that I actually owned that land, to get that person who's been there the past 3 years working it? Do I have the right to get him off the land or not? Or does that person have the right to keep the land because nobody had come to claim it? With regard to a non-irrigated field, that is one that is watered by rain, in which produce grows during certain seasons during the year, its presumption of ownership is established in 3 years, but they are not from day to day, since the fields are not worked and harvested continually throughout the 3-year period. Okay, so the things in the first paragraph need to be worked every day. Non-irrigated fields are known not to be worked every day, only in the rainy season. So it's 3 rainy seasons. Rabbi Yishmael says 3 months of possession in the first year, 3 months of possession in the last year, and 12 months of possession in the middle, which are 18 months, suffice to establish the presumption of ownership with regard to non-irrigated field. Rabbi Akiva says a month of possession in the first year, and a month of possession in the last year, and 12 months of possession in the middle, which are 14 months, suffice to establish the presumption of ownership with regard to a non-irrigated field. Rabbi Ishmael said, in what case is this statement that 18 months are required for a non-irrigated field said? It said with regard to a white field, that is a grain field. But with regard to a field of trees, once he gathered his produce and then harvested his olives and then gathered his figs, these 3 harvests are the equivalent of 3 years. Since he harvested 3 types of produce, this is equivalent to having possessed the field for 3 years. Okay, so different opinions here, Yishmael, Akiva, about what 3 years is. Is it parts of 3 years? Or, like the anonymous Mishnah, is it the entirety of 3 full years? So the Gemara then on this, Rabbi Yochanan says, I heard from those who travel to Usha. Usha is a place where the Rabbinical Academy, the Sanhedrin, used to be. So it's one of the places after Yavne and before Tiberias where the rabbinic court was. Rabbi Yochanan says, I heard from those who traveled to Usha to study with the sages there that they would say, from where is it derived that presumptive ownership is established in 3 years? From the forewarned ox. Just as in the case of a forewarned ox, once it has intentionally gored 3 gorings, it left the presumptive status of innocuous ox, and it is established as having the presumptive status of a forewarned ox. Here too, once he has worked and profited from the land from 3 years, the land left the possession of the seller, and it's established as being in the possession of the buyer. The Gemara questions this comparison. If so, say that just as with a forewarned ox, the owner is not liable to pay full damages until the 4th goring, here too the land should not be established as being in his possession until the 4th year. The Gemara rejects this question. How can these cases be compared? There, once it has gored 3 times, it is forewarned. And the requirement for there to be another 4th incident for the owner to be liable to pay full damages exists, because before it gores, after having become a forewarned ox, what is there for the owner to pay? Here, once he has worked and profited from the land for 3 years, the land is established as being in his possession. So 3 for an ox is not necessarily the same as 3 years for land. The Gemara asks, if that is so, according to the explanation that the forewarned ox is the source for the presumption of ownership with regard to land, even possession that is not accompanied by a claim, that is, where the possessor has no explanation as to how he acquired it, should be sufficient to establish a presumption of ownership, just as goring 3 times automatically establishes its having the status of a forewarned ox. Why did we learn in a Mishnah up ahead on 41, any possession that is not accompanied by a claim explaining how the possessor became the owner is not sufficient to establish a presumption of ownership? The Gemara answers, what's the reason a possession that is not accompanied by a claim is not sufficient to establish a presumption of ownership? Because in a standard case where one has presumptive ownership, we say that even if the claimant proves that the field was once his, since the other is in possession of the land, perhaps the truth is, as he says, that he purchased it from the previous owner. But now that he himself does not claim that he purchased it, will we claim this for him? Like, why should we make it easier for the presumptive owner to be the owner? Rav Avira objects to the explanation that the presumption with regard to land is derived from the halacha of a forewarned ox. If that is so, a protest that the claimant lodges during the 3 years, not in the presence of the possessor, should not be considered a protest, because it must be similar to the halacha of a forewarned ox. Just as we require that the testimony concerning a forewarned ox be in its owner's presence, so too here we should also require that a protest be lodged in the possessor's presence. The Gemara answers, this is not difficult. There, with regard to a forewarned ox, it is written, and warning has been given to its owner, indicating that the warning must be issued in the presence of the owner. Here, with regard to the protest, your friend has a friend, and the friend of your friend has a friend, so that the protest will become known even if lodged not in the presence of the possessor, as word of it will spread. There's no Torah edict mandating that the protest be lodged in his presence, and it's sufficient that he hears of it even secondhand. Let me just see if there's so I want to stop here for today, and because there are other things happening in the building that I have to clarify here. Let's stop here for today, and I'll let you know if we're going to be meeting on January 25th or not. And I appreciate everyone being here today and understanding my crazy schedule. I really appreciate that. So have a good day, everybody, and Happy New Year, and we'll see you soon.
You too. Thanks, John.
Happy babysitting.
Thanks.